It's back to this idea of how many times can you hit somebody with a trolley in a supermarket before, you die.
Yeah.
And that's where the country is right now. We got hit by a trolley and we all said sorry. We were well past that stage. We've got hit by a trolley and we've tutted. We've got hit by a trolley and we've loudly cleared our throats. We just got hit by a trolley again and we've remained deathly still and silent. I don't think there are many more stages that trolley can hit us before we all just know.
Good morning, Stephen. How are you?
Morning. I'm very well, thank you.
We've been listening all about your pets.
Yes. Spamming social media with pictures of my puppy.
Well, we've been listening on your Substack as well.
Yep. They get mentioned.
Well, it's excellent, by the way. People subscribe to Stephen's Substack. It's excellent. I'm very interested about learning about the law.
Good.
For a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think I'm going to get myself in trouble with a few things.
Okay.
And secondly, I'm just confused at the state of the law in the UK. I feel like we're descending into a police state with a two-tier justice system.
I think you can be forgiven for saying all of these things, although it wasn't that long ago that a Home Secretary was forced to resign because she noticed that there was a two-tier justice system.
Was this Suella?
Yeah. I look back on that as utterly surreal. I mean, all she did was tell the truth, so of course she must be punished.
You're not allowed to tell the truth in UK.
Well, it does look like that's what's happening in our society, and that's certainly not healthy. Churchill critiqued the authoritarian regimes before we went to war with them. And he said that they were very thin-skinned, they couldn't deal with humour, and there was neighbours were tittle-tattling on each other, everybody was trying to witch hunt everybody else, businessmen were trying to destroy their rivals by saying they'd said something wrong, and it all just feels quite like that.
Yeah, it's a weird place to be in because my American friends mock me that I will be arrested for memes. And we have seen people arrested. Look, there's certain things that seems to be instigating violence. I understand there's questions around that. I'd be interested in your views on that. But other people have been arrested for recording violence. We seem to be in a place whereby there's a chilling effect that is created. I've also got my own legal case. I've just finished a 5-year lawsuit, which I'd love to tell you about because that was essentially a slap case. But I think people are being programmed to keep quiet.
Yes, and there's an awful lot of fear about. And I'm glad that you're interested in the legal system and the law, because I think the law itself has become extremely flabby. And you have to reach quite a level of ability in law to just be able to say that. Because, of course, I first started studying law 26 years ago. And the first time I looked at a bit of law and found it hard, that's because I wasn't very good at law. And I just had to admit that. And I had to learn law and, I've had to practice it and I've had to get better over the years. So you have to get to a certain level of ability to be able to turn around and go, actually, it's not me. This is badly drafted law. And I think we are absolutely surrounded by badly drafted law. One that could well apply to you, but none of us know because none of us know what the rules are, is Ofcom.
Yes. Well, it doesn't apply to me yet.
Well, exactly.
But it might be coming.
It may be coming, depending on what they decide. I mean, why on earth we're letting them effectively write our legal system? I mean, who are they?
Well, to me, Ofcom is an infringement of free speech.
Yeah, well, it's an absolutely bizarre idea that we would have democracy, we would elect legal representatives, and they would pass a law saying, oh, the other guys are going to make the law? These guys? The guys you don't know? The guys you can't sack? The guys you don't elect? I mean, it's just mad that we do this. So, I mean, and one of the things that I'm obsessed with is the word impartiality, because I think it's been forgotten in our country. I think there's been a constitutional switcheroo where it's been swapped for a word called independent. So something like Ofcom is not trying to be impartial, it's trying to be independent. And all of these regulators aren't trying to be impartial anymore. The BBC isn't trying to be impartial. They take great pride in being independent. But the two words don't mean the same thing. And while I was hunting that, because I'm obsessed with impartiality, I think I'm the only person who's got a working definition of what it actually means. But I was hunting to see if anybody else had definitions. So I'd root around whenever I could get employment contracts, you can find them on Google, and or the Scottish government's got guidance on impartiality, which is completely rubbish. And Ofcom is supposed to be a great source of what the word impartiality means. And when you go and look at Ofcom's definition, it's absolutely, it's as useless as a chocolate teapot.
Oh, here we go. Meaning of due impartiality.
Well, that's so first point. Note that they say that they're interested in due impartiality.
Okay.
So they're not interested in impartiality all the time.
Well, they say here it's an important qualification to the concept of impartiality. Impartiality itself means not favouring one side over the other. Due means adequate or appropriate to the subject and nature of the programme. So due impartiality does not mean an equal division of time has to be given to every view, or that every argument and every facet of every argument has to be represented. The approach is due impartiality may vary according to the nature of the subject and type of programme and channel, the likely expectation of the audience as to content, and to the extent which the content approach is signalled to the audience. Context as defined in Section 2, Harm and Offence of the Code is important. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I would call professionally a word soup. Okay, so when I say I have a definition of impartiality, it doesn't look like that. Okay, it's much simpler, it's cleaner. So if you want good law, you have to make it simple and clean. You have to, and I think there's a constitutional duty in our country that any lawmaker has to make their law clear to non-lawyers.
Okay, that's not clear to me.
No, it's not. Well, I don't think that's even clear to me.
Okay.
To me, the addition of due means that they've just decided that they've added a level of subjectivity that they now control. What's appropriate mean? They've just added the word appropriate, and now they've added adequate or appropriate. So adequate and appropriate mean the same thing, because I don't think those words do mean the same thing. So there's two concepts weakening impartiality.
Okay, let's just expand on this. Due impartiality and due accuracy in news. 5.1. News in whatever form must be reported with due accuracy and presented with due impartiality. Accuracy can be subjective.
Accuracy is less of a concern. It's interesting how they're all obsessed about misinformation.
Okay.
But frankly, things that aren't true get said all the time.
All the time.
Doesn't necessarily, and I don't think we'll ever be able to stop that. So actually, accuracy is probably the one that, due accuracy is probably fine, but due impartiality, well, no, why not just impartiality?
So significant mistakes in news should normally be acknowledged and corrected on air quickly, or in the case of BBC, ODPS corrected quickly. Correction should be appropriately scheduled, blah, blah, blah. No politician may be used as a newsreader, interviewer, or reporter in any news programme unless exceptionally it is editorially justified. In the case, the political allegiance of the person must be made clear to the audience. We have Nigel Farage has a show on GB News.
Yes.
Where does that sit with this?
Well, why is that the rule?
Well, I don't think it should be the rule.
No. So for a start, let's get back to the fact that we're a democracy and we're all voters. So these are our rules, our laws, and Ofcom's written them. Why does Ofcom get to write that? Why does Ofcom get to pick? I'm with you. I'd rather have and this is going to, many of them are my friends, but I go on their shows, but I'd probably just have a really simple rule saying none of them can have jobs in media broadcasting.
Well, that would be a fairer rule, an easier rule.
Well, exactly. And this is what I want to return to is the easy rules. And because the legal system is quite a bully in a lot of ways. Because you're not allowed, it's not a defense in law to say that you didn't know what the law was. So that sort of ability to defend yourself, if you like, from a badly written legal system is denied to you. There's an assumption there that the legal system is going to be so well written that you therefore understand the law.
Oh, hold on. How much law will I need to understand to be a compliant citizen?
Well, this is it, isn't it? If the ignorance of the law is no defense, and it is, then there must be a duty on the state to produce as little law as possible, so that you don't have to sit down for weeks every year, reading buckets of new laws that have come into effect. And it has to be written in a way that you can understand it, i.e. not written like that.
It's quite interesting because the area I operate in is essentially become like the free market for news and content. It's been, I think, a bit more successful in the US. I think the likes of Rogan and Theo Von, Lex Friedman, all these people are a response to the complete and utter failure of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, and they're getting better numbers because of that now. They're not always accurate.
No.
But I think we're adults and we understand. When you listen to Rogan, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'll do a bit of research myself. I think Daryl Cooper may have made some mistakes on his judgment of Hitler here. I think I'll go and do some independent research, but we as adults can do that. but we seem to get a more open and honest conversation, whereas I know with Fox, because I've seen it, I know with CNN, we are getting really op-ed as news, and it's mainly propaganda. We've had less of this in the UK because I think the problem with that, it hasn't allowed the mainstream news to fail enough.
That's interesting. That's very curious.
Yeah.
Because it is failing quite badly. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, having Ed Balls interview his wife was, a low. I think that's just a low.
Yeah.
And if Jacob Rees, if Jacob Rees-Mogg's wife had interviewed Jacob whilst he was a politician, I would still think that's a low. This is not a party political point. This is just the point that I really don't think that you should be interviewing your wife. I mean, that just seems to me, as when she's a politician, you're not going to hold her to rigorous standards. You're not going to be Andrew Neil to your own partner. It's just or Jeremy Paxman. These great interviewers, sadly, are becoming more and more of the past, because if you look generationally lower, I don't really see the same sort of caliber and the same ability to hold people to account.
Well, interestingly, I think Konstantin Kisin is starting to do that. His interview with Kemi, there were certain Paxman elements to the way he held her to account, and I've seen some clips of his Boris Johnson interviews done the same, and I think that's quite interesting.
That is, but look again, you went outside the mainstream media.
Of course, yeah, but we have to.
You have to, yeah. There's nothing inside the mainstream media. There's nothing but lowball questions, accepting what the government say, and often just reciting it.
I think part of that, though, they're holding on to an infrastructure that is expensive and big to run. We can compete with the numbers. There's 3 people in a room here, and we're not regulated by Ofcom.
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you think they could come for us?
So Ofcom just had a major legal defeat because GB News actually stood up to them. These points I make about Ofcom, if they're made before an English judge, a judge, over there in the Rolls building in our fair city, then the judge will agree with me, because the judge will be a highly talented lawyer. Okay. And the judge will say, I don't understand this. And when a judge says that, that's not an admission that the judge is dim. That's this law is badly drafted. And it's that point about having to reach a certain degree of law to have the sort of the cojones to just turn around and go, it's not me, it's that. And it's badly written. And that's what I think a London High Court judge would do if challenged. And that's where Ofcom are now presumably going to sit there going, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
But it's expensive to do.
Yes, it will be expensive. Issue. Yes. And that's where I call that the brutality of the law. I mean, that is so deeply unfair. And my entire working life, so I qualified in 2003, and the bar for whether or not ordinary people can access the courts has been rising. Fewer and fewer people have been able to access the courts. I don't think most ordinary people can actually use the courts in any serviceable way. You can probably have a dispute with your ex-partner about the children and do that yourself. Mm-hmm. And the judges there are very helpful because they're very sympathetic to the subject matter. Woe betide anybody who has a dispute over a sort of normal value house, because I don't think you're very likely to be able to navigate that system. It's very complicated. And I think you probably won't be able to. Similarly, low value wills, I don't think they're going to be disputed. And so you're going to start to see all sorts of unfairness and injustice, which is really bad, by the way. Human societies don't like that. One of the things that my entire life, the criminal barristers take themselves very seriously, and they think that they are absolute heroes. And they may well be absolute heroes. I just personally never liked criminal law. I find it quite boring. And I don't like the subject matter because it's gross. It is the worst things that humans do to each other. So I never wanted to be in it. But their confidence, if you like, let's put it that way, it sort of draws attention away from the civil justice system. But the civil justice system, having a dispute about your kids, the house, the will, a contract with the builder, a plumber comes and all of the pipes he did burst in your house and you want financial compensation. Things like that are actually equally important to a society and to keep a society running. There's a very interesting anthropological study that said that the reason that societies tolerate the Taliban in Afghanistan and the mafia in southern Italy is that they provide this civil justice function. So you go along to the Don, you say, Don, we had this contract and he did this and he did this, and the other one says he did this and he did this, and then the Don decides. And they know it's not going to be 100% fair, but what businessmen need is certainty.
I saw this in, where were we, Kurt? Was it Malawi? We went out to Malawi to make a film. We're in Africa. We're Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi. We went out to this village.
Yep.
And they have a chief.
Yep.
And the chief is the arbitrator of all civil disputes in the village.
Yep.
He's respected. I'm pretty sure his role, I think it's passed down through families. But every civil dispute between people within the village comes to him, and he's the arbitrator of it. No one has to spend any money, and his decision is law in that village, and it works. And it made me think back to where, I mean, I've got so many personal things I could tell you about because I skirt the law, but I've got a dispute with the guy who built my house.
Right.
He's probably cost me £10,000 to £15,000, of which I'll be careful with my words because I don't want another libel lawsuit, but I would dispute. My issues is that the cost to take it to trial is probably 5,000 to 10,000 because I've looked into it. So if I lose, I'm then 25,000, 30,000 down. And if I win, my research says I can't guarantee I would be able to enforce payment from him because I think he's set himself up in a way that
he's a limited company.
No, I think it's more his personal assets, the way he's set them up.
Right. Okay.
God forbid if he listens to this, but it's a real dispute over things he's not done that he's meant to have done for the house.
Yeah.
And so I end up just going, I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
And that is, to give context, that is background to my libel lawsuit. I had a 5-year libel lawsuit. I accused somebody of being a liar on Twitter.
Okay.
Provable liar. Claiming the identity of somebody they weren't. I was sued in the High Court. It was a 5-year lawsuit. My costs about 1.3 million.
Okay.
Here's 3.6. I still haven't paid all of my legal fees at the moment.
Oh,
I know.
I have a lot of sympathy for unpaid lawyers.
If I'd have lost, I would have been bankrupted.
Yep.
He committed perjury in the case. He got a £1 judgment.
Right.
He was proven to be a liar afterwards. I still haven't received my funds back, but I will only get 85% of my cost, even though he brought the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Even though he's a proven liar, I can't recover all my costs and what I've been through. And then claiming compensation for the impact on me, my business, my family is also close to impossible. It feels a very unfair system of which a rich person got to exploit it to try and destroy my life. And I'm like, how am I as a British... By the way, this guy's Australian.
Right.
How am I as a British citizen, British taxpayer who employs people, able to have the law weaponized against me, and even when I'm proven right, not able to recover my costs and be compensated? The whole thing is just like, how have we got here?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first point I'd make is that 85% is actually quite high.
I know.
When I talk to a client, I would normally say 65%, somewhere in the region of. And then I'd say there's a lot of discretion for the judge on costs.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of discretion for the judge on costs. So you have to go into it with your eyes wide open. But we haven't really paid any attention to the civil justice system for a very long time. And it's all of us are sort of vaguely to blame for not paying attention to it, because literally every TV show that's been made about lawyers and law in the last, 30 years. The Americans are slightly better because they've got Suits and Ally McBeal. But, we've basically just focused on crime. That's it. We've almost forgotten that there's another type of lawyer. When I tell people I'm a barrister, they're always like, oh, do you defend or do you prosecute? And it's like, neither. Why would, we've obsessed about crime. And by the way, the legislation in crime has been obsessive too. I mean, it started on David Blunkett. I don't know if anybody remembers him. But he passed a bunch of laws, and ever since then, we've been writing and deleting and writing and deleting and writing and deleting and growing criminal law with like nobody's business and all these offences. And that's ballooning out with Starmer, who seems to think you need a specific offence for everything. So he's trying to brag about bringing an offence against spiking when spiking's been unlawful for ages, for years, decades. This is ridiculous. But he wants to bring in a specific offence for any tiny thing that happens, and then you just end up with loads of laws that nobody can possibly read. We need to turn attention back to all this.
But who? Because as I see it, we need lawyers to fix this, but lawyers benefit from the bloated law.
Yes, there's 2 points really on that. One is that, yes, a lot of lawyers benefit from this, and I've noticed it over my life. So you started out that somebody was a land lawyer, a property lawyer. And then after a number of years, people were either residential land lawyers or commercial land lawyers, because there was enough law in each that they could justify specializing in either. And then as we carry on printing law, they get more and more specialized.
Right.
And they just sit in this specific area. The one thing that I do that I think mildly horrifies other lawyers is that I don't mind skipping over to other areas. It's never intimidated me. In a way, I've never really finished my degree. So I've just always, I mean, I have finished, but I've got my MA and everything. But I mentally I haven't. And mentally I've carried on because I got adopted by a legal academic. So the same culture of let's just carry on chatting about this area of law, which means I've never worked on an Ofcom issue. I've never been paid to look at Ofcom's rules. This is just me, being me. And it's like I'm quite fearless when it comes to legal systems, and a lot of lawyers will just stay in their lane because it's profitable. So that's true. The other one is that it becomes more and more intimidating for lawyers. So whilst I have this boldness, most lawyers are incredibly risk averse. So most of them would get very, very scared and nervous if they're in an area that isn't their area. And that's quite understandable. I'm not criticizing them for that. It's just that we now have so much law that we're all basically becoming victims of it. We're all trapped inside this massive legal bloat. But what you will start to see is that it starts to sort of really fall apart. And this is what we're seeing in two-tier justice. And that's the one that, I firstly, just on two-tier justice, I spent a lot of time in pubs, and
Me too.
And I live quite a charmed life on a lot of levels. My granny would not believe the life that I live. So I like to stay grounded. I have the Spoons app on my phone, and I'm a normal person who goes to normal pubs. I was amazed at the cut through of two-tier. So people in the pub, people in Spoons were talking about two-tier. You'd been sitting here, and that table would be talking about two-tier justice. That's what politicians call cut through. And it's not normal I thought that issue would be so technical that it just wouldn't really, it would be a Westminster talking point. But actually, I think this is a massive national issue, and people are really paying attention to the fact that we there was a preacher who said awful things about Jewish people, not prosecuted. And then there's somebody who says something that looks quite mild to us, is prosecuted, ends up in prison. There are people who possess really horrific paedophilic images. I've never even seen any of this stuff, but this is, again, why I flag why you don't go into crime, or I don't want to be a criminal lawyer because I don't want to have to look at that, But they're possessing category A, which I know is the highest category. I don't know what it involves. Or yeah, exactly. I don't know what that, and I don't want to know. But I know category A is the hardest stuff. Not going to prison. And yet, and then Elon points out, somebody goes to prison for a meme. This is, and I thought that would be very, very technical and people wouldn't understand it. But actually, it's cut through. You can hear it, people complaining about it in Spoons.
Well, the meme has helped, the two-tier kier.
Yep, the wording has helped. Yep, but it's definitely cut through. People really feel it. There's a poem by Kipling that talks about how a Norman lord advises his son on how to rule the Saxons. And he's always like, if they start talking about, I can't remember the exact line, but if they start talking about that ain't right, or that's not fair, then prick up your ears and listen and change and do the opposite, because that's when they'll kick off. And I think there is something deeply English about something being just wrong. There's like an inherent unfairness to it. I always call it, how many times can you hit somebody with your trolley in Waitrose before they die,
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Yeah, I think it's a reflection on the UK as a whole at the moment, in that there is certainly, I think we're kind of like pre-significant civil disruption, civil disobedience. There is a demand for something new politically. People are being hammered in every area. It's not just that. It's inflation. It's cost of, your energy, your cost of your groceries. It's in every direction. People are feeling hit and harmed and damaged. And then when you throw in a two-tier system, it's not even an elite peasant two-tier system, which does feel like it exists, but it is an identity politics two-tier system, which is the worst of this.
Very divisive.
Yeah. So how real is the two-tier system, and where does it manifest itself in the worst ways?
Well, I think in police discretion, I think we're seeing that. That's probably one of the worst ways. And in sentencing in crime, I think that's got completely out of whack with what people expect. And, the latest guidelines from the Sentencing Council just look racist.
Yes.
I mean, they just do.
We saw that.
I know the chair of the Equalities or whatever it is body, Kwango, said that they may be racist. And it's like, why do we have to pussyfoot around everything? If that's not racist, then I don't know what racist is.
We had the wording up before, didn't we, Connor? I can't... No, it was Robert Jenrick put the tweet out. By the way, we're getting feedback from that TV again. Is there a volume on it that you can just turn off? It's just... Yeah, that's better. I think it was a Robert Jenrick tweet where he put out this specific wording from the Sentencing Council.
I've read it. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't talk about it if I hadn't read it. But, and it's just shocking.
But so who is the Sentencing Council, and how are they able to do what seems to be so obviously bad?
Well, that again, it's like Ofcom. Okay, so the same thing. Right. And so this is Blair's model for how you run a country. Blair started all of this constitutional change. In his defense, it was carried on under Gordon Brown and escalated massively, and Cameron did nothing to stop it. So power has been taken out of Westminster by all of these acts of parliament. The act of parliament giving Ofcom control over digital, possibly is so vague. I mean, it's ridiculous. And they just say, Ofcom will deal with it. Ofcom will write the laws on this. Who the hell are Ofcom to write our laws? And who are the Sentencing Council to write our laws?
Let's just remind people of the wordings. They might not have listened to the previous episode where we covered this, but a pre-sentence report will normally consider necessary if the offender belongs to one or more of the following cohorts. So at risk of first custodial sentence or at risk of custodial sentence of 2 years or less. Look, I can understand that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A young adult, typically 18 to 25. Again, I can understand that.
I'm quite sympathetic.
Yeah, if you want to keep young people out of prison. Female, I know there are specific female issues, but is that sexist?
I don't like that one.
You don't like that one? Okay, that's fine.
Because I'm a bisexual.
Okay.
And I like to point out that there are awful men and awful women and good men and good women.
Okay.
Okay, I've dated them all.
Okay. So it's not just us men.
No, it isn't. No.
This is the key one. From an ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or faith minority community. So if you're from some kind of minority community, you may get a more lenient sentence. That's a problem. Pregnant or postnatal, again, I understand for protection of the... Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to that. You don't want babies raised in jail. No. You don't want pregnant people in jail. And
God, no.
No, sole or primary carer for dependent relatives. That could be used as an excuse, and I could see that being weaponized.
I'd rather give the judge discretion on that because, if you say I'm the sole carer for, my second aunt, twice removed cousin, whereas if you stand up and say, look, I've got a kid, then that's different.
Or if the court considered one of the following may apply to the defender has disclosed that they're transgender. So we've seen a number of people who pre-trial, during trial, have come out as transgender.
Yes. Well, but why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
They're literally incentivizing people. They want people to come out as transgender.
Has or may have any addiction issues. Well, jail might be good for that. Has or may have serious chronic medical condition or physical disability or mental health. Again, I've got a limited amount of sympathy for that. But for example, if you've terminal cancer, you've got months to live, there's no point putting you in a prison.
No, but learning disabilities.
But depends on them. I think it would depend on if it was
Okay, I'm really bad at maths. I'm going to say that's dyspraxia.
Well, no, so I wouldn't include that. But if you're, learning disability,
that'll be ADHD and dyslexia, or
that's no excuse for you, me, or anyone really.
You still have a moral.
Yeah, you understand the difference between right and wrong. Yeah. Okay. Look, the big and obvious one is the minority groups, and that. I mean, unfortunately, that sits alongside a lot of issues where, people, particularly, let's say, the rape gangs, was a big issue, but it starts to make people think that, hold on a second, we're allowing crime, disorder and chaos to come from certain communities.
Yes, it's the bigotry of low expectations that gets me. And I have a particularly vested interest in this because starting in 2011, I volunteered for a charity called the Social Mobility Foundation, and I set up my own charity, which is called BVL, Improving Social Mobility in Law. And I worked, BVL I've left after 13 years, and the Social Mobility Foundation I still work for. And I've mentored kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. That's been the sole criteria. So, and a lot of them have gone. They don't, once I've helped them, they don't need to hang around. They don't owe me anything. So, some of them have gone, but a lot of them stay. And they become like extra children. They become my second children. I can think of many of them in particular, that I feel actively parental towards. And because that was the only selection criteria was that they're disadvantaged, that means I've got spare children across the ethnic mix. I've got, do I think that my white boy should be discriminated against so that my black boy can? No. What? That's not fair. And anyway, my black boy's incredibly talented. He can get there on merit. Thank you very much. I don't need you discriminating in his favour. And that's what this is. It's this awfully racist type of anti-racism. It's just, it's fundamentally racial at its core.
Is it this suicidal empathy that?
Gadsad, yeah.
I heard him talk about this.
Possibly. It could be something even more sinister, because the Marxists and Stalin in particular just used identity politics as a control mechanism. So what happens if you use identity politics as a control mechanism is basically this year there's an in-group and they're going to get special treatment. And the reason for that is that everybody will hate them. And then next year you take that away from them to give the special treatment over here, and they're still now being hated by everybody else and they're attacking them and they're not attacking Stalin. And that's literally what he would do. He'd deliberately use identity politics to stop himself from being overthrown and to keep the whole USSR at each other's throats and hating each other so that they didn't turn on him. And it's a form of human control. And it's just awful. It's just not nice. And we did this. It fundamentally doesn't fit our country because it's just very un-English to actually care about this stuff. One of the things that I always think protected us from sort of large-scale racism, like you saw in South Africa and in the United States, is that we've always been riddled with classism. So we've never cared what identity anybody is if they're rich.
Yeah.
That's just never bothered. When Pocahontas came here, she was incredibly well treated, with all these stories of people from different ethnicities. As long as they belonged to a royal family and had loads of money, we were lovely to them. They got to meet Queen Victoria and everything, It was not a racial-based system. It was always a class-based system.
This is why the immigration debate is something I'm struggling with at the moment, because I'm a conservative at heart, a small c conservative at heart. I believe in conservative politics. We have seen the rise of reform do very well, and I'm very interested in some of those policies. But the immigration debate has become a hot topic, and I'm from Bedford.
Right.
In Bedford, we are a very multicultural community. We have a massive Italian community. We have a massive Indian community. We have a Bengali community. We have quite a big Eastern European community now, and I've had no integration or racial issues. There are pockets where different races sit, but everyone seems to have got on okay. So the immigration debate has been a problem for me because I think it's focused a lot more on race than the crime itself. And I think if we dealt with the crime, the race wouldn't be the debate. And I don't like the scapegoating of racial groups. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't identify if there's a Pakistani rape gang problem and how do we deal with that. But it is something I struggle with because as an English person, I always think we've been very welcome to immigrants coming out. I'm the son of an immigrant.
Well, it's been normal for us for a very long time. I always like to point out we had our first curry restaurant in something like 1848 or something.
Exactly.
We've always welcomed and embraced diversity, and it was largely because we have been this class-based system where the Normans have got all the money and are in control of everything, and the rest of us are Saxons, and we're all just treated like scum. And if you're treated like scum, you tend not to be racist to others. I mean, my granny loved it when the black soldiers came over from America during the war because they brought a new type of dancing. So did, I later find out by reading all of these books, so did Her Grace the Duchess of Devonshire. But my granny was just an ordinary person, an ordinary working class woman from Liverpool, but she had a marvellous time with the young gentleman ask no questions, hear no answers. But
well, I have an 8 p.m. dinner booked tonight at Chat House in Bedford, which is a curry house, and the food's incredible.
yeah, well, exactly. And when the Americans tried to, there was all these lovely, heartwarming stories of when the Americans tried to impose their racial segregation, and we just went, no.
Yeah.
No, not having that.
No.
And
But it feels like it's coming here now. It's become a scapegoat.
If we allow identity politics to carry on, if we move away from universalism, which I think will be a huge mistake, and we should just always, always echo the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, just keep reciting Dr. King's words that you judge a man not on the color of his skin, but on the content of his character.
Exactly.
That's what we need to get back to. That's what I mean by universalism. Humans, we are one race. You know, so I even find racism a bit odd because it's suggesting that we're different races. We don't call the gingers a race. You know, they're not. Are they a race? It just feels so weird to even call it that. We are one human being. I mean, there isn't. It shouldn't be possible.
Are they a protected minority?
Who, gingers?
Yeah.
Well, you saw the wording. It's so woolly that they may as well claim to be.
Yeah.
I mean, just invent a cultural minority and say that's what you are. And just say, no, very few of us around, so I'm a minority. I'm a Jedi.
So would you go as far as saying we're essentially living in a constitutional crisis right now?
Yes. I think the time...
And can we blame Tony Blair?
We can definitely blame Tony Blair. One of the problems I have is that I'm very inculcated in being a lawyer.
Okay.
And so we are very much culturally, we don't like to say things which are shocking or might be considered shocking.
Oh, I don't mind.
So we like to go, well, I'm conditioning myself out of it because I'm realizing it's just not helping. If I sort of mince words. So the president of the Supreme Court said that there was a widespread misunderstanding of the Constitution. To my mind, those of us who are trained in this way, that's like him dropping a massive, massive. That word he's huge. You know, when a judge in court says something like, "Mr. Barrett, I'm troubled by this," he may as well have just, let off a loud inhaler in the courtroom. But ordinary people don't hear anything. They just think, well, that doesn't sound very dramatic. But that's because we've got this culture of being very undramatic. So
Well, I don't think we have a culture of a constitution. So, and I give you the background to that is that I've done a lot of interviews in America.
Okay.
Hundreds. And spent a lot of time there. And I've said on the podcast many times, I'm very jealous of the US Constitution because people are taught it and understand it. I say, I wish we had one. And then in the comments, people are like, no, we have a constitution. We have the Magna Carta. But I know in the US, people know and understand the Constitution. Everyone definitely knows the First and Second Amendment. A lot know the Fourth and maybe the 10th. But in the US, people know and understand the Constitution and refer back to it. And yes, there are constitutional challenges there, but it is a foundation of American law that certainly the senators and the Congress people understand. I did a little bit of digging on the Magna Carta, and it's like some bits are still relevant. Very few. So we don't have that constitutional basis that we as a country can refer to, which protects us from the whims of government.
I always like to highlight, if you want the most important document, I always think it's the Bill of Rights, 1688. So that's the one I would always push people to. But the fact is we've got a load of these documents, and each of them is important in its own way. We are the way we are because we're an evolved constitution. And let's take it right back to that old class system. We're still structured as though a tiny number of Normans run everything. Mm-hmm. And because what would happen is the school wouldn't teach the Constitution because the Norman would be taught it by his dad. And so the Normans would all know it, and the Normans all got together and would agree to support other Normans. So, this is what I always get his name wrong, but I think it's Peter Hennessy, Lord Hennessy, who's a constitutional historian. He always gets dewy-eyed over all this. And he says that he talks about the good chap constitution, and he gets very sad that it's dead. But it's like, well, it's dead because it was only sustainable if a small privileged minority had all the power all of the time, which, my lord, is not how I want my country to be. So the major problem is that we don't teach it.
Right.
I think our Constitution is superior to the American Constitution.
Okay.
Because I think the American Constitution is mistakenly, and I think it does this because it's a federation, because the states really want to keep quite a lot of independence. So what they've done is they've created, at their top level of government, they've effectively created permanent war. Okay, so the president will always be at war with Congress. Congress will always be at war with the courts will always be at war with, and they'll all just be at war with each other all the time. And thus, at a federal level, if you're a state, you're like, good, nothing's ever going to get done. I can go back to Texas and carry on being Texan, and I can go back to, Washington State and carry on being Washington State. And I think because they still have and I think a lot of us don't know that they have very strong state identities.
Yes.
And that they really, it really does matter to them. And that they have really strong state level government because, again, because we have a class system, we tend to take local politics as we see it as lower class, and we only ever pay attention to Westminster.
Yeah.
Whereas because they don't have a class system, they take local politics really seriously. And, their state legislatures are just as important. And they, this is where stuff's actually going to happen because at a federal level, they just have permanent war. And permanent war means nothing ever gets done. And our constitution is the opposite in a way. Our great Victorian constitutionalist called Dicey really loved our constitution over theirs, and he said he could not reconcile how two countries could be so similar in morals and values and principles yet have such diametrically opposed constitutions, because our constitution puts everything in Westminster. Literally, I mean, Blair's done what he can to take it out, a bit to Ofcom, a spadeful of power to Ofcom over here, spadeful of power to the Sentencing Council over there, take away power a little brick by brick. And he's done a lot to get it out. But there's still vast amounts of power there. And ultimately, all power is there. And what's even more hilarious is the Victorians literally put them all in the same building. So the senior judges are all in the building. Both houses of legislature are in the building, the press in the building, the public in the building, all of these elements that are the Constitution, that make up the Constitution, all in one building. It's absolutely, when you look at Parliament and work out what the Victorians were doing, it's stunning to get them all in one building. Whereas, the Americans have lots of different buildings all at war with each other.
Right, okay.
And that's because of how humans are. If you have humans with different power bases, they will fight each other for dominance. That's what happens. I could you could have predicted this with the Scottish Parliament, and the minute you create a Scottish Parliament, it's going to have a fight with Westminster one day. It's now inevitable, and we've just had that with the gender stuff, and it'll happen again because it got them a lot of fame and attention, which politicians like. It'll probably get them more funding if they kick off enough fuss. I mean, perfectly honest, I deeply admire Scots and Scottish people. Although I am terribly and unavoidably English, I do rather think that a large number of Scots nationals are just faking it in order to get more cash. It does seem that strikes me as quite wily. It's like, oh, we might leave, so give us more money, because they've got the Barrett formula where they all get paid, they get more per head than England does. And I do feel that that's a sort of, well, if you don't, I'll leave. I will. I mean it this time. I've packed my bags. It's just like, I'm not sure I buy this. But anyway, well, good on you for conning governments because they believe it. So you've done very well. Canny. Yeah, sorry, I've
That's fine. So do we have constitutional protections? Do I have constitutional protections that I'm not even aware of?
What you have is a mechanism that people aren't aware of and people aren't engaging with anymore. So when was the last time you emailed your local councillor? Who is your local councillor?
Well, I know local politics.
Okay, good.
Quite well because I'm quite integrated into the Bedford community. So I own a football team there.
Right.
I own a bar. About to open a cafe. I can even tell you what I'm up to today. You might like this. So I'm going to say it because it's going to go out before the show. But I've essentially written a letter to the police, and I'm putting them on notice because we have a very serious problem of drug, alcohol addiction in the town centre. So I'm opening up this cafe, and I walked up and down the street, open drinking, open drug dealing, open drug taking. And so I've done a bit of research, and we have a PSPO in the town centre which bans open drinking.
Yep.
But it's not being enforced. Obviously, drug dealing is illegal. It's not being enforced. We have a plague of shoplifting, which is affecting the shops locally. The multi-storey car parks are dens now for homeless and alcoholics and drug addicts to sleep, beg. And so I now know, after speaking, I've been going around surveying, just nothing too objective, but just surveying people. People now feel unsafe in the town. Women aren't coming into the town. Children aren't coming into the town, which is affecting the shop. So it's this 20 to 30 people who are causing this decline in the town. So I've put the police on notice, and I've said, if you don't present a plan within a month, I am going to put in place a plan. And here's what it is. I'm going to employ a private security, and probably within the. And I'm looking at how I can do this, but essentially, I think I can do the private security in the car parks because they're private property, so we can prevent people in and out. I can, under I think it's Section 24 of the Criminal Act. You'll know it better than me, that we can use citizens' arrest over certain levels of shoplifting.
You can definitely use citizens' arrest.
Yeah, and so I would employ a private security to do that. We can also we can confiscate alcohol. We can do that, and we can ask people to move on. So I want to push to the edge of the law, say, if you don't do this, we will. And if we are forced to do this, then this is going to be an embarrassment on Bedfordshire Police. And you won't win this in the court of public opinion, that we're having to do this to protect our town because you won't.
Yeah.
So that's the limit I'm going to. So I know the mayor, I know the local councillors. I was emailing a local councillor today, and I'm going to see her, Andrea Spice. She's very good.
Good.
And I've got a meeting with our local MP, Yassin Mohammed, on Friday. So
You're doing what I want to do, but the whole country needs to copy you. And they need to get much more sophisticated at copying you.
And I talked about this with family and friends, and I said, look, I'm risking arrest here. I could get arrested. There could be a situation where the private security go beyond the law by mistake, because it happens. I have doormen at my bar. Sometimes they make mistakes, and I risk arrest. But if I get arrested, I know the court of public opinion will win because everyone is sick of this. And it's not that I'm not sympathetic to addiction. I've been an addict myself. But if you're an addict and you're refusing to get clean and you are regularly shoplifting in the town centre, then we have a problem. We have the right to deal with it. Yeah,
so it's back to this idea of how many times can you hit somebody with a trolley in a supermarket before, you die?
Yeah.
And that's where the country is right now. We got hit by a trolley and we all said sorry. We were well past that stage. We've got hit by a trolley and we've tutted. We've got hit by a trolley and we've loudly cleared our throats. We just got hit by a trolley again and we've remained deathly still and silent. I don't think there are many more stages that trolley can hit us before we all just know, and Churchill said...
I think we're there.
Churchill said that the greatest word in the English language and the most important one for us to never forget is the word no. And I would hate to correct the great man, but in the 21st century, am I allowed to swear?
You can say what the fuck you want.
Well, in the 21st century, I think that probably the greater word is bollocks.
Yeah.
But the two mean the same thing. And the two ideas that he was just off his time, he probably couldn't say that. But, I can get away with it in the 21st century. Because you've just got to have this idea that there is a line beyond which we won't go, which again... It's quite there. It's obviously there in the Kipling poem. The idea that you can actually, the Normans were quite pushy. They were quite abusive. They were like, and in the poem, they're like, yeah, you can actually push him quite far. But when he starts talking about justice, when he stands there and looks you dead in the eye, oh dear, and we're at this oh dear moment because it feels as though we're not being policed. It feels as though crimes are not being addressed in any way. I mean, I live in a different regional English market town, and we have exactly the same problems that Bedford has, and that you've detailed. And I could tell any officer who wanted to come where the drug dealing is and where the drinking is, and I'm pretty sure I could recommend. I could guess which establishments were secretly operating from where, but we don't do anything about it. And a society without law and order, and the reason that the societies people should study, by the way, if they want to understand now, is really the fall of the Roman Republic, when you had to get incredibly wealthy men, like there was a man called Crassus, who literally had to set up a private fire agency, what do they call firemen, in order to deal with the fire problem, because the authorities just weren't dealing with it. And the other one is the Weimar Republic, which is where... because the society should have been functioning well, but it was obviously functioning badly, and no one could work out why. And we're at this point now where we're doing obviously stupid things. How can we borrow £60 billion to give away 19 to other countries? How can we? If we're borrowing money, we're admitting that we're poor. Okay, that's what, I've had to borrow money at various times in my life. It was never an expression of me being flush. And when I'm wealthy, I don't borrow money because you don't. That's just...
Well, they operate on different rules.
Yeah.
I mean, so you probably don't even know this. The history of this podcast was actually prior to this, it was a Bitcoin podcast. So we studied economics and Bitcoin and the digital gold as an exit from the fiat system because of inflation. So I've been around the world studying this, and every country that you go to has really high inflation. They stop you using the local currency. They want the dollar.
Yeah.
And it's the citizens realizing the state isn't working for me because the money isn't working. I need another money. And so I've become kind of very aware of these kind of debt issues and borrowing issues. And the comparison is look, you might borrow for a mortgage or a car and you can pay it off. But if you don't pay your mortgage, you'll get a warning. You don't pay it again, they might repossess your house and you lose your house. You have a budget.
Yeah.
Our governments have got out of any idea of a budget. They have an internal printing machine.
Yes.
They can print money forever. But what does that do for us? It forces us to have higher energy bills, higher grocery bills, because the distribution of the money isn't fair. It's another one of these signals alongside crime that we are being governed by idiots.
Yes. And in both the fall of the Republic, the Roman Republic, and the Weimar Republic, you got money printing. Now, obviously, in Rome, it wasn't quite like that, but what happens is
clipping.
It's clipping, and the silver percentage in the coins goes down. And there are various... I won't bore you with Roman history, but it's the same phenomena. It's mass inflation caused by, and in Weimar it was just money printing, and we are just money printing. We're also, the phenomena I try to get across to you, the one we complained about at the start of all this, is law printing. You know, literally we haven't turned off the law printer for years. And it was something, I never remember which year it is, but as a lawyer you sit in these libraries, law libraries, and you know, on the one side there's all the case law, and that's fine. And then the other side, there's all the statute law. And it's sometime in the 90s, around John Major's time, that instead of one volume, you go one volume, 2 volumes. And then the next year, I think, was back to 1 volume, but then it's like 2 volumes, 2 volumes, 2 volumes. It's like, whoa, we're massively over printing laws.
Legal inflation.
Yeah, legal. It's law inflation.
Law inflation.
Yeah, and that's why people don't know the law anymore. It's why if you're charitable, I mean, I think that there are all sorts of political reasons why enforcement's not happening and policing is collapsing. But it's also, if you're charitable to the good officers, because you've got to remember that most of the officers are good officers. The good officers are often have their hands tied. And you saw it with the protests over the Just Stop Oil. They're like, I literally don't know if I can arrest them or not. Why? Well, because we've got this law and this law and this law and this law, and I can't work out which one applies. Law inflation, too much law.
Yeah, again, I'm trying to always be research when I do these things, but so I was looking into the police about why we don't see the police on the street anymore. Why haven't we got a permanent police presence in the town when there's clearly this ongoing issue, which is detrimentally affecting the town and businesses? And there's 2 primary reasons. One, we have a local issue whereby a lot of the budget goes to another town, which is Luton, which is it's a different issue. But also, apparently, the police systems for recording information, the bureaucracy, is leading to more time in front of a computer for fear of getting things wrong than out there policing. That to me is that I just put it in the bucket of stupidity. It is.
There's another, and that's completely right. But there's another problem as well, which is that to advance to elite level in our society now, particularly within the public sector, your effective job is to intellectually justify completely unjustifiable things. And that is your job. So you sit there and you're like, we have fewer police on the streets. The people don't want that. But actually, that's a good thing because, and that's what you're conditioned to you. You'll go, actually, that's a good thing because you're basically
so right.
And you see it in the other podcasters whose basically their entire career is to go, actually, that thing which is awful is a good thing because, and it's spin, it's nonsense, and it has reached the point where we're just going to have to use the bollocks word or just say no. I mean, I've sat in rooms with senior police officers where they have tried to intellectualize complete nonsense, and they end up as the sentencing guidelines do, being racist. So they when the Bobby on the Beat one and people try and because that's obviously right, okay, and you don't need a degree in anything to know that it's obviously right to have more police officers on the streets, particularly at the moment when things are so bad, and more enforcement. Given that, I mean, the amount of parking offences, you could actually be quids in if you were sensible. I mean, you can get loads of fines for all this stuff. But we are at a point where our elite are intellectualizing gibberish because that's how they succeed, and that's why we reward them for all of this nonsense.
important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Yeah, I just think we need to get a little bit tougher and more hardline about these things. Me and Connor were having a discussion on the way down because we've been looking into, I mean, this is sounds quite extreme, but it came up. We were listening to your podcast. You were talking about the pedophiles who have been arrested for accessing content, not going to jail. And you're like, put them all in jail.
Yeah.
And we've heard these issues of the prisons being full, and we were discussing them because we see the videos on Twitter that come from police cells that show criminals who've been put in jail, smoking weed, playing cards, hanging out.
Well, the problem we have now is that because we now allow women police officers in male prisons, we have a spate of we're having to send them to prison because they're doing naughty things with the prisoners.
I mean, that one blew my mind. The video that came out of the girl having sex with
It's not just one.
It's
multiple times.
Okay, so we should stop that.
Which is why we didn't used to have female police officers. I mean, a presumption has arisen that everything that was done in the past was done for evil reasons. That anything the Victorians did must be sinister. That's all. Or if it's from the Victorian era, it immediately gets a handlebar moustache and a monocle and told that it's evil. But actually, people did these things for perfectly sensible reasons.
Yes.
And it's perfectly sensible to not have female police officers in men's prisons if that's going to happen.
I agree. Have you seen the El Salvador prison, ECHR?
No.
So this is a really interesting thing. So I went out to El Salvador a few years ago, just after Bukele came into power. At one point, it had the highest murder rate in the world. It was the murder capital of the world, San Salvador. Connor, see if you can find the murder rate chart for. You can probably just search for murder rate chart for El Salvador. And so Bukele came into power, quite a hardline view. He wanted to end the gangs. The gangs were MS-13, I can't remember the other one, but they had control of large areas of El Salvador. They're called red zones. And essentially, I went out and visited a missionary there, and they said, this is what it's like. If a gang member walks into your family's home and says, we're going to take your daughter, your 12-year-old daughter, and she's going to come and be my girlfriend, or we'll kill you. If you stop them, they will kill you. The crime rates were very high. And so this is the murder rate that's been dropping. I think it's even lower than that because that's 2020. I think they've got the lowest murder rate per capita in the Western Hemisphere. But what he went in, he just arrested all the gang members.
Right.
Now, there is a human rights issue here because they identified them by their tattoos and they couldn't prove who was and who wasn't, but they just put them all into jails. And it's reduced crime. But they've opened up this prison, this ECHR prison, where basically you're there for life. It's not pleasant. You're in these cells with 40 or so people. You're never getting out, but you're no longer causing crime. I'm not saying we should bring this to the UK, but they've now taken, 236 Venezuelan gang members they took over the weekend from America. From America.
They're basically renting prison space.
Find that Bukele tweet where he said it's a very low cost for America, but it's very high cost for us. But they've taken this super hardline approach to crime in El Salvador because these gang members are just unstoppable. It's interesting to read this. Today, the first 238 members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua arrived in our country. They were immediately transferred to ECHR, the terrorism confinement center, for a period of 1 year. The United States will pay a very low fee for them, but a high one for us. Over time, these actions, combined with the production already being generated by more than 40,000 inmates engaged in various workshops of labor under the Zero Idleness program, will help make our prison system self-sustainable. As of today, it costs $200 million per year. On this occasion, the US has sent us 23 MS-13 members wanted by Salvadoran justice, including 2 ringleaders. One of them is the member of a criminal organization's higher structure. This will help us finalize intelligence gathering and go after the last remnants of MS-13, including its former and new members, money, weapons, drugs, hideouts, collaborators, and sponsors. As always, we continue advancing the fight against organized crime, but this time we are helping our allies, making our prison system self-sustainable, and obtaining vital intelligence to make our country an even safer place, all in a single action. May God bless El Salvador. May God bless the United States. Now, look, this is an extreme way of dealing with criminals, and I'm not saying we should have the equivalent of ECHR in the UK.
No, it's not very British.
It's not very British, but at the same time, I don't have an issue with funding more prisons, and
No.
I don't have an issue with less friendly prisons that are a little bit more tougher on crime, that deal with crime. And so we were having this kind of debate about this, is where's the line? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And it's a weird one because you can see good and bad incentives in all of this.
Now, so
I'm not saying we should have this, but...
No, but let's just address this on the level of what's been happening in British society.
Yeah.
So 2 main points to get across. 1, everybody has been brainwashed into believing that the words right-wing mean evil.
Yes.
Therefore, nobody wishes to be described as right-wing. And
Okay.
you've got this with David Davis saying Rupert Lowe is too right-wing for the Conservative Party. And, you know, they do this all the time, but for really quite low-level things that I don't think actually do mean. So I'm pointing this out because that irritates me as a lawyer. Like, I really dislike it when definitions get broken or misused, and it just irritates my head. It triggers me, if you like. I don't like that because of it. I don't dislike it because of my politics. I dislike it because of my law. That's a bad definition. Everything that's evil is not automatically right wing. That is not what the word right wing means.
And everything right wing's not automatically evil.
Well, exactly, yes. And what they would say is that law and order is inherently evil. That's why we have none. That's because our political class has been conditioned to believe that we as a nation don't want hard rules. What will therefore most likely happen here is that a left-wing party, because that's not right-wing, what we saw there. I don't actually know the leanings of the government of El Salvador. It might be right-wing, it might be left-wing.
He actually says left and right-wing is stupid. He explains how it came from the French establishment of the parliament. He said he doesn't believe in left or right-wing. He believes in right or wrong and doing the right thing.
Yeah, but what that is tough law and order.
Yeah. You could argue it's conservative because it's a conservative approach to justice, because I believe the more liberal approach to justice is a bit more forgiving, a bit more understanding, a bit more empathetic.
But you see, that again is the great myth that we never talk about the liberals.
Okay.
So a lot of the time when we talk about politics in this country, we talk about the right wing and we talk about the socialists, and the liberals sort of cunningly run away and hide and don't realise that they don't tell anybody that they're actually in control of everything.
Yeah.
Which they are. But you're right, it's definitely illiberal. So what I predict, and I think is more likely, and what has happened in Denmark, is that the left-wing party, the socialists, have decided to be tough on law and order. And so they're doing all these sorts of things which people would say that here, our political elite would say, well, that's right wing. It's like they're obviously socialists. You can't really accuse them of being right wing. It doesn't really work. But all that's happened is we've had this breakdown in the definition of right wing to the point where it just means bad person. And that's not very helpful because, one, it's a broken definition. So other than irritating me, it means that you'll get broken outcomes if you use broken definitions. I get on really well with my substitute mother runs a steam fair, and I get on really well with the traction engine guys because I've worked out that traction engine and engineering is very much like law. It's
right.
just because we're just a system. And the other one that we're very like is software engineers, because it's the code is going to produce what the code produces, you know, and if you write it that way, or if it's got a bug in it, it's going to be bugged. And if you write it that way, it's going to do this. And if you write it this way, it's going to do that. And law isn't really that. When it works, it's not flexible, which is why I think the liberals don't like law.
Okay.
Because it is rigid. The other great one that the liberals are very upset about, and they've ever since the 90s, they shriek and hide in a corner if you point this out, is that Hitler had a legal system. Okay, and they can't deal with that because they think law is moral and morally good. And Hitler's was obviously an evil legal system. And it was, but it was a legal system. It was just an evil legal system. Yeah. You can have evil legal systems. They can't really deal with that because they want to see themselves as inherently morally good. They want to see lawyers as some sort of moral crusaders, which I don't think that we are. I just think we're the engineers of a system of rules. But yes, we need to get back to defining words properly. We need to fix the definition of right wing because it's utterly broken, and then we need to consider whether it is evil or not evil, and whether we need people to be tough. Being tough on law and order shouldn't be right wing anyway. So I think what will happen is the Labour Party will discover that it's very electorally popular for them to do that. Not that, but to actually have enforcement of law.
So how do we return to a point of sanity?
We must remove the Liberals from power.
Well, that's half of the Conservative government and all of the Labour Party.
Well, I mean, I know about this uniparty theory, and again, it did happen in Weimar. The simple fact, and I'm awful because I'm pretty liberal myself. I mean, I'm way inclined towards liberalism, but I was just brought up to believe that too much of anything will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what it is. And I stupidly proved this right when I was about 9, when I ate there was a lovely, like a Sara Lee apple pie, and I ate the whole pie.
Mm.
And then we spent hours lying on that bed in utter pain because there was too much pie and too tiny a child. And I learned my lesson then that too much of anything is bad for you. And we've had too much liberalism for too long. They're literally running out of windmills to tilt at, which is why you get this transgender nonsense. They're trying to whip that up as a great social crusade. It's like, no, the great social crusade was that people are treating same-sex attracted people in a really nice way.
Mm.
That's the victory. Bank it and move on. You don't need to find some other great social crusade. And it's why the liberals get themselves into this ridiculous position, like in the 70s when Pi was supporting, they were supporting paedophiles. It's like, no, too much of anything is a bad thing. And we've had endless liberalism for 30 years. So we're going to have something else.
So they needed to realise, like, you won. You got everything.
Yeah. And
you can retire.
Not just that they won. I think they should be really proud of a lot of what they achieved. And it seems to me that the liberals in particular, particularly in the US, or particularly over here because of the US, I think, can be very worried that bad things are going to happen the minute that they lose power. Mm. But one that I always like to raise is abortion rights. I don't think abortion laws are going to change in this country ever. I think we've pretty much settled them.
They're quite strict here.
Where they are. Well, I would rather that they were quite strict. I don't want abortion, I don't want it more liberal.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't want to take away abortion rights because I recognise that that's going too far too. You've got to recognise where the balance is. And so I just think that those issues are settled. But if you talk to liberals, they're like, if we're not in power, they'll get rid of Roe v. Wade. And it's like, well, that doesn't actually apply in this country. And, we have settled abortion rights. And I don't think anybody's going to push back against same-sex attracted people and trying to say that we're morally evil. I do think there's a burden on us to become respectable, which is what I do, what I try to do. It's why I bang on about it. If I didn't think that, I'd just shut up about it and wouldn't mention it because it's relatively irrelevant. But a great friend of mine is Douglas Murray.
Oh, great.
And again, I think Douglas is just making us utterly respectable. And to the point where, did you notice Douglas was on something like Piers Morgan, and one of these young, flamboyantly liberal gay men accused Douglas of being straight. He just said, you won't understand because you're a straight man. And it's like, no, what you mean is Douglas is respectable, man. And he is. And Douglas, got to take him to task, and it's all very entertaining. But that's what we crave. So we made friends when I was 19 and he was 20. And, we didn't want to go to Pride and behave like idiots. We wanted to be respectable people who were treated seriously. And yes, he's gay and although, can I just say, Douglas is the worst person in the world for mocking bisexuals.
Okay.
He's on camera saying bye today, gay tomorrow. He's known me for 26 years. It's like, I'm not going to change.
Hold on, Douglas Murray's gay.
Yeah.
I never even knew that. I didn't know that.
Did you not?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know why. I just
genuinely didn't know that.
I genuinely didn't know that.
I had to break the heart of a lot of Jewish women who come up wanting to marry him.
Huh. I never knew that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what you're basically saying is there's no need for degeneracy on the streets.
Yeah, nobody's going to try and arrest Douglas for being, gay. That's not going to happen. We're not going to... What the Liberals seem to fear is that the pendulum will swing back. But I don't think that's what... I think they genuinely have won on a lot of, particularly the social issues.
Yeah.
I mean, the economic issues, I don't think we are economically liberal, because I think if you're economically liberal, you get rid of all of these regulations that are stifling the economy.
Well, look, I think you'll agree with this or empathise with this, but I know from speaking to some of my gay friends is that the trans issue they felt has harmed the gay community.
It absolutely has. Well, the first people it harmed were the old-style transsexuals. So I've got a mate who's an old-style transsexual who, the first time I met him, he's like, I'm not really a woman. And it's like, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to use, to call you she, her, and hold doors. I used to hold doors open for drag queens in heaven, when I was young enough to go to nightclubs, a very long time ago now. But he didn't want to pretend. He didn't want me to pretend. He didn't need to pretend. It wasn't about that for him. It was just about, him feeling comfortable. And that's very different from these angry men who are demanding to get into women's spaces. That's a very different thing. And I don't, none of us can really approve of that. And when J.K. Rowling has to get involved, and she's a lovely woman.
A hero.
She is a hero. But it's becoming clear that with too much liberalism, they start to prioritize adults over children. That's what's really going on. And they don't realize that actually in human society, you have to prioritize children over adults.
I'm also going to, at risk of pissing some people off, I think there are times we have to prioritize women over men.
Yeah. Well, no. So you're a man and I'm a man.
Yeah.
And for a long time, people try to pretend that because I'm same-sex attracted, I'm not a real man. But I know that if I was on the Titanic, women and children
Go
first.
first, yeah.
And it's probably my duty to stand on that Titanic and die. That's what you do as a man.
And I think you've rightly pointed out there are evil, bad women in the world, but the majority of sex crimes are men against women.
Yeah, and that's because of the power imbalance.
Power imbalance, and we want safe... I mean, this is one of the points I was talking about Bedford. I want a safe place for everyone, but my priority is women and children, because they're the ones who are going to feel more unsafe. Sarah Everard worked for me. I knew her well. She worked for me for 5 years. So I know that case very well. I had to go and see her parents. And that to me was the sign that we have not done a good enough job of protecting women, and we should do that, and we should be proud to say that. I think it became a bit weird at times where we want for so much equality, we stopped saying no, us as men have a duty to protect women.
Well, exactly, and it's for false equality, because actually what we are is one of the most successful multicultural or multi-ethnic. I think actually multicultural is that's a whole topic of itself.
Yeah,
but we're a multi-ethnic society that is very successful. I want every woman to feel safe. I was they're trying to pretend that Shakespeare is racist.
Oh, you brought this up today, didn't you, Connor?
Now, so at the risk of embarrassing her or annoying her very charming new fiancé, I think any room is massively improved if Nana Akua walks into it. She's incredibly, I know her very well, she's incredibly glamorous, and you know from GB News. And, how can I compare thee to a summer's day could be written for her. What the hell could it not be written for her? It doesn't make any sense to argue that Shakespeare is universally human.
I don't know what the argument is. Connor just mentioned it this morning. They're trying to cancel Shakespeare.
Well, in order to get to elite status in our society, you have to intellectualize nonsense. So what they're doing is intellectualizing nonsense and trying to say that Shakespeare is colonial. I mean, we didn't even have Britain. We only had England. So the idea that we were a colonial empire is just absolute tosh. But again, what it is I think that there is... The greatest thing the devil does is to convince you he doesn't exist. The greatest trick of the Marxists is to pretend that there aren't Marxists around. There are Marxists around. And I think that they engage in cultural assault. And I think that's what this is. They don't like Shakespeare because he's elite, because he's very successful, because he's brilliant. There are people in our society who want to pretend that all human beings are equally capable, largely because they're often not very capable of things, but because they're some way very angry with the world or with how they are. I mean, scratch the skin of a lot of Marxists, not, by the way, the libertarian Marxists who I go drinking with, they're lovely, but scratch the skin of the basic Marxists, or Marx himself, and you get a sort of very bitter, angry person. And you need to grow up in life and accept that you have limitations. So I happen to think I've been quite academically successful, and I could argue that I have some intellectual gravitas in our society. I can't drive. Okay, I face my limits every day. I failed that test 5 times. I don't have anywhere near any sort of physical ability or hand-eye coordination. So, at the end of the day, yes, I've completely failed at this in life. And there are other aspects of life where I think I've succeeded, and there are other aspects of life where I've completely failed. I mean, I'm not going to, we're not doing therapy, but that's what a whole human being does. They recognize their limits, they know their strengths, and they don't try and pretend that everybody's the same. And Shakespeare's a better writer than me. That's okay. I can live with that. Doesn't hurt me in any way to say that Shakespeare's a far better writer than I will ever be, and he's an absolute genius. And there are outstanding geniuses in our society, and I'm probably not in that class, I'm just a better rounded person. But we need to teach, I think, our young people to live with themselves. One of my great bugbears at the moment is that we're not teaching them that the greatest success in life, because you're very successful, but
I'm not intelligent. That's the thing. I'm a hard worker. I'm a grafter. I've worked from 6 a.m. for 25 years. I know I can outcompete people with putting more time in, but I'm not very intellectual.
But that's great. I mean, being
I know
intellectual often doesn't lead to success. And there are lots of very intellectually able people who sit around all day being very sad because why don't I have this? Why don't I have that? When I first started going on the telly, a lot of my fellow barristers, you'd see that they tweet rude things about me, and it was often people, they never asked me, and it's like and I didn't realize I had that skill. That you're going to be live in 10 seconds. You will have a minute and a half. Say something interesting. Go. I didn't realize I could do that because that's not what barristers have to do.
But this is just life, figuring out what you're good at, what you're not good at. Learning resilience, learning to fail. And I think the problem is we've probably got a lot of those Marxists in the education system. I was talking about on the show the other day. I want to meet this kid. One of my friends was telling me they had before the election they had a mock election,
right,
at the school. And I'll get the numbers wrong. It was something like there was a large percentage that voted green, and I like that. You want little kids voting green. Sure. I know, but you want them thinking about the environment. And that empathy as a child for the environment is fine. I think the biggest percentage was Labour, and there was one kid that voted Conservative. One in the whole school, and I'm like, who is that kid?
You do need to find that kid.
Yeah, I've got to find that kid. That kid's that's a warrior.
I mean, I have to say, because it's so funny because if you think of how the Greens view Conservatives, they would think that they don't support the environment.
Yeah.
But I live in quite a conservative place and I'm a parish councillor. Let me tell you what would happen to me as a parish councillor. I'm non-affiliated as a parish councillor. But I would fear for my life if I started cutting down trees in the woods we run. Because all those Conservative voters would hate me instantly. And I'd be, Stephen cut down the trees, and it would be all over Facebook. He's cutting down the trees. The idea of cutting down a tree triggers Tories in a way that people don't get. So there aren't often these political divides that people think that there is. But I'm interested in the young people because I know a lot of them are moving towards reform.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this. You can go and read the books. But the truth is, it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. Yeah, it's a weird one. So this is this shifting of the Overton window on reform where it was whispers or you kind of knew a reform voter or you would. Now it's, I publicly talk to my friends and like, oh, I'm voting for reform. Their little crisis at the moment is frustrating. I'm not enjoying it.
No.
And I fear there are outside influences trying to damage the party. Well, I know there are. I mean, it's obvious. I know Nigel is the right guy to lead that party, and there shouldn't be a challenge to that. And I look forward to them getting through this because they are the hope of a lot of people now.
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't trespass too much into politics ever because one of the things that irritates me about the lefty lawyers is that they act as though their being a lawyer impacts their political opinion. So I always say that, I'm an expert in law. And when I say things about the law, it's my duty to get them right, by the way. You absolutely must do that. And I learned electricity law just for the purpose of a Twitter thread. I'm neurotic about learning law. It's insane. No, I don't know anybody, even my dad, who, because he's a legal historian, he feels that that's like the ability to do all law. So he doesn't feel there's any limitation on him. So he taught himself cuneiform script so that he could learn Hittite tort law, which is a type of civil law for non-contract based civil wrong. But he literally taught himself to read this stuff. And he's the only person who's ever published on Hittite tort law. And he just sees it as an absolute license to go through all of history. What he won't do is go further forward than about 1860. But what I've become is like a version of my dad, because I just do it in the modern world. I don't learn cuneiform or I don't know what Sumerian tort law is, and I don't care. I stay always within the English legal system, but I am more than happy to do what he does and basically just can think it's all mine. Basically, apart from tax law, that's the only one that I've never felt any desire to get anywhere near. It's like, even crime I will do just because it's fun and interesting. But yes, I'm digressing. Sorry.
So no, but reform is an interesting point, because actually, when Rupert Lowe mentioned they were a protest party, I believe that was an accurate description at first. But now they are a hope for and by the way, it spans classes, but they are a hope for something different, because I don't think we've had anything good in this country pretty much since Margaret Thatcher. That's my own personal belief, by the way. But I think we've descended into this where we've got now, law inflation, financial inflation, crime inflation. Everything's inflated in the wrong direction. And so the reaction is a new set of politicians, a new set of ideas that will change things, hopefully. But I wonder, because we had Liz Truss sat where you were, and I've become quite aware of how she understood some of the issues, tried to solve it, but the Quangos and the Bloat estate stopped what she wanted to do. What I worry for reformers, who have, I think, a distinct chance of winning the next election. They have a very good chance. I hope they're able to find the right MPs to do it. But what difficulties will they face trying to reverse some of this decline?
Well, so the first thing will be that concept we've talked about in a few different ways, like right wing being bad. Lawyers taught not to say things that sound dramatic, because if you want status in our society, you've got to say boring things, and you've got to intellectualize nonsense and pretend that, black is white, up is down, because the system must be protected at all costs. Reform's greatest strength there is that that's an incredibly weak state power.
Okay.
And I think what I should talk about more, and I think I've recognized it myself, is that for all the statement cases of somebody sent to prison for a meme and all the rest of it, effectively this is a very weak dictatorship. It's a very weak sort of control structure. And if you just ignore it and laugh at it, Churchill always said laugh at authoritarians, and this is what we're living under. So to laugh at them. One of my great joys in life at the moment is Ed Miliband. I'm going to miss him so much when he's gone, because I have this whole thing on Twitter where Ed says, and then it'll be something completely mad, and usually because he's obsessed with farting cows. But I'm going to miss him. But you must laugh at them. But they are fundamentally weak. So I don't think they'll be able to block reform as long as reform are properly advised. What I think was tragic about Boris and Liz is I think we're now at a point where you need, in number 10, a highly experienced and able lawyer. You then need somebody...
Keir Starmer meant to be a highly experienced lawyer.
Well, he's not trying to fix anything. So he's fine. But then you need somebody who is actually willing to stand up to the government lawyers. So one of the things that I can talk about in a sort of vague way is that I had a blazing row with a very senior government lawyer because she was wrong on the point on constitutional law. And I wasn't going to back down, because I don't back down when I know I'm right. And I had this is one where I pointed out in The Spectator this point about how we deal with international law. And then the Supreme Court, like a year later, said I was right. So now I'm like, oh, I feel very strong. That's vindication for me. So by the time I'm having this argument, I'm already like, the President of the Supreme Court's already agreed with me. I'm not going back down. So I had this blazing row with her. But they genuinely believe that all international law is binding here, all of it.
Okay.
If you believe that, you cannot govern this country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for a start, you can't stop the small boats. Next, you can't control migration actually at all. It literally could be weaponized against you by some evil... It's almost as though if there were evil dictators in the world, they'd weaponize migration against Western countries. I don't know if that's... I'm just conspiracy theory. But you cannot stop it because you're bound by laws you didn't make, that you don't control, and that often say things that are now politically very damaging for your country. So we need to go back to the understanding that actually we decide which international law will apply here or not.
And we can do that.
We can do that.
So we don't essentially need to repeal the ECHR.
No, what we need to repeal is the Human Rights Act.
Right.
So that's what you need to do. I mean, I have a point that I think the British are incredibly rule-abiding. I think we invented the rule of law. I think the rule of law is inherently valuable in its own right. So I think current thinking in the Conservative Party is that we'll just ignore the ECHR sometimes. That's like not very British. And it doesn't sound very healthy, does it? Why are we belonging to a court if we're not going to honour its judgments? Surely the better thing to do is just leave the court.
Okay.
Just go. And I think we'll have to in a lot of instances. These things are not free, by the way. You don't get to join. I think it's very hard to find the figures because the ECHR is part of the Council of Europe. So, of course, we have to pay to this thing called the Council of Europe. And it looks, I can't really work out how much it is, so I'm not going to say a figure, but it's not free and it's not cheap. And if it's not helpful, it's not free and it's not cheap.
See ya.
Yeah, why not? So I think we probably do have to leave on that basis, that I just don't think culturally we could ignore its judgments. I know a lot of other countries are more than happy to ignore its judgments, and many, many do. I just don't. Sometimes we just have to recognize we are who we are, and I don't think it would be very helpful for us. So I would get out of that. And then we're going to have to be very, very muscular with the UN. And we're going to have to tell them that whilst we like the UN and we sign lots of things, those aren't necessarily going to be binding law here unless Parliament has agreed them. So go back to this principle of incorporation. And we're going to have to unincorporate or make sure it isn't incorporated a lot of the UN stuff. Because a lot of the UN stuff is just broken. And
any examples?
There's all sorts of treaties around the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, and we'll need to deal with that in a way that we want our asylum system to run. I'm assuming we want an asylum system. We might not. I mean, again, so one of the reasons you touched on it, and it's quite funny. I've advised governments before, and ministers don't understand the difference between policy and law. And I would always, and I don't think I was terribly good at when I was doing this as an advisor to ministers, because I would just go silent and go, well, they'd go, well, should I do this? And I go, well, that's your choice. It's not for me to tell you do this. It's not for me to tell somebody that Britain should have an asylum policy or shouldn't have an asylum policy, or, should have 100,000. That's a political question. And in our society, that's taken by a minister. And then if the people don't like it, bye-bye governments, bye-bye MPs. But, that is our system. It's not for the lawyer to tell. And this is what a lot of government lawyers and civil servants have got very drunk on, this policy-based power. And they're going to be really upset when we take it away. This is what the blob is. But we're going to have to take it all away.
It sounds like we need a few more of yous.
That's very kind.
Are there many of yous there?
No. So I was once asked for a name for a job for government, and then I sent a name, and then I got asked again, and they said, could you have 3 names for the? By the way, we're going to have to fix recruitment in the civil service. That's completely broken. I won't bore you with the detail, but
give me the TLDR.
It's the system will produce the same product. It's not the individual. So if you don't like the head of the government legal service today, you can't just sack him or her, because they will be replaced with exactly the same product.
Should we have a more system like the US? Whichever party's in power should appoint the leaders of the quangos, the bits we keep.
There are 2. So going back to this dicey point, that 2 countries who are culturally aligned but completely opposite. That is the American system. And they think it works for them. And it's one solution to that problem.
Okay.
And again, it's not for me as a lawyer to say, yes, you should have that solution, or no, you can't have that solution. If you want that, we can have that, because we can do anything. Our solution to that problem is that the downside is that you lose or risk losing talented people and who actually know what they're doing. The downside is that an incoming administration is sort of slowed down because people have to learn how to do this job. Right. Oh God, I'm now head of this. How do I do that? So there is a downside to it, and particularly with us at the moment, because the Yanks are better and our employment law is a lot fatter than theirs. So if we adopt their system, half of the new people would spend all their time doing training courses on health and safety before they did anything. So they oh, well, have you done I can't help you, Minister. I haven't done my equality and diversity training. So we'd get bogged down in a lot of that. If you want the US system, you have to have a US style system. Our solution was to have impartiality, to understand that word, to have a clear definition, and then enforce it within the civil service. We also believe, and this is another thing Blair changed, and I don't know where your listeners and viewers will land on this, but we used to have an elite civil service. Okay, so there is a very good argument for paying the people who run your government a lot of money.
Oh, no, I mean, I personally agree with this. When they talk about raising MP salaries to like 95,000, I'm like, why aren't we paying them $500,000 a year and getting the best people in?
Well, exactly. I mean, Singapore's prime minister is paid something like 2 million.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and Singapore's a really good success story.
Yeah.
I've talked about my mentees. I don't send them off to be government lawyers because if they're government lawyers, they'll earn something like 45 grand. And if I instead send them to a US law firm in the city, they'll earn £147,000.
Let's get the best people in who are incentivized to do a good job.
Yeah.
But make it more transparent and easier to get rid of people who are not performing.
Absolutely. And have fewer of them.
Yeah.
Because you don't need this many. I mean, the amount of the civil servants is beyond belief. So just as a back of the fag packet policy, I've always thought that you could probably sack 3/4 of them and double the pay of everybody who remains. That way you save a large portion of the budget, but the ones who have remained feel happier.
Yeah, I think it should be easier to get rid of people as well. I mean, one of the things I would say to Angela Rayner is that her employment laws, they don't stop me getting rid of people. They just make it expensive, and it is a misallocation of both time and capital. Because I know, having run businesses, if I want to get rid of people, I can. I just have to bring in HR people. They know what I'm trying to do. I know what I'm trying to do. We engineer it to get rid of people. I'm open and honest about that. That's what everyone is doing, and we're wasting time and money to get rid of people that we just want to get rid of. And I'm not saying we should be able to discriminate. I completely agree with not discriminate against people. But if a business needs to get rid of someone, it's usually because they can't afford it or they know they're shit.
Well, they don't. So because the Liberals see everything as behind a Victorian handlebar moustache being evil. They don't understand that most business owners wouldn't sack people because you have to pay money to hire them. You have to pay recruitment consultants to replace them. Most employers want well-motivated, happy staff. So you almost don't need the state saying you must have well-motivated, happy staff all the time because most employers would do that or they'll be unsuccessful.
Also, getting sacked is a good learning lesson.
Well, that's true. And it might be character building for the individual. It might turn them around. And people do change in life. A great friend of mine is Peter Cruddas, Lord Cruddas. And, he spent time working, I think, as a milkman. And now he founded CMC Capital Markets and is a billionaire. Wow. That's because he learned and he turned his life. I mean, when he was a milkman, I think he was being very noble. I think he was a single dad. So I think it really is heartbreaking. So we get on the single dad level. We know what it's like to raise children. Lovely, obviously, it's a blessing. But
it's my son there.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Good. Into the family business, a great tradition. I don't think employers are generally evil trying to hurt their employees. I just don't. I think the premise is flawed. And I think that people are scared of a bogeyman that doesn't exist.
It's true.
I just can't. And if you just make the economy work, even if there are bad employers, and there are bad employers even with employment laws, but those bad employers will go bust because the employee will be able to move job. And a lot of the idea behind these protections is that, you'll get a job and you'll work there for 45 years. That's not the world. That's just not how it happens.
No, if you create a good economy, the people like me will create more businesses and employ more people.
Yeah, and that makes a competitive job market, which is what will push up prices and salaries and make people more wealthier. I mean, capitalism is not bad. Capitalism is the only thing that ever really achieves good in humans. I'm a great fan of the Roman Empire because it was largely a capitalist system. I mean, they had mass production and factories and just a level of sophistication that people still don't really, I think, twig that this was actually really a lot like us now. Okay, they didn't have electricity and okay, they hadn't figured out radios yet, but, they were pretty advanced and a lot of the basics of Adam Smith's, style economics was there. just to be very boring, but there's the thing called redware pottery became the thing to have. Like when Wedgwood was the thing to have and all that. But in the Roman Empire, it was always all redware. Have you got red? Oh, she's got red. And so they've got this across the empire. The same type of plates, exactly the same, identical plates, would be in Syria and in Britain.
Amazing.
I mean, that's just incredible. I find that incredible. But the other good that capitalism does, if we are really worried about racism coming back, which I find difficult to be plausible, because racism is not only evil, it's also inherently stupid. Nobody is good or bad based upon, a physical characteristic. This is nonsense. This is magic thinking. It's utterly silly. But if we are worried that racism is going to come back, capitalism was what really killed it here. Because during the 17th century, on continental Europe, you get the highest numbers of death until the First World War. And it's all over whether you're Catholic or Protestant. And there is endless war on the continent, endless. And in comes Queen Elizabeth here, and she just says, I don't care, I'm not making windows into men's souls. I mean, yes, Catholics were not well treated, and yes, there are grievances that occurred, but broadly speaking, we never got anywhere near the killing that occurred on continental Europe. And we were the first to go and talk to the Turks. We were the first to talk to the Ottomans. Because everybody else was like, we can't possibly talk to those people. And we were like, smells like a market. And we like trade. But we had this wonderful phrase during the Enlightenment called, there's no Catholic in trade. So I'm a Protestant, and I don't care if you're Catholic if I'm doing business with you. And and I think business civilizes people. I think business fights. If you're worried about racism, then the best way to fight it is business. If you make sure everybody benefits economically, they'll all get on. They're not going to fall out.
Yeah, no, I agree. God, you're just talking so much common sense.
Oh, well, I'll probably get cancelled then.
You'll probably get a job in government if reform win.
Well, I would like to help somebody fix the country. That's all I'll ever sort of say.
Well, there's a lot of people like that now. There's a lot of people coming for. I mean, I'm trying to, in my own small way, locally. You are trying to. There's a lot of people now. We had Dr. Lawrence Newport in here the other day with his Looking for Growth.
He's very good. Yeah.
We've had Charlotte Gill here exposing. You probably know.
She's amazing.
Amazing. I think.
Although, did you cover the topic of all the people trying to steal her credit?
Yes.
It's just awful.
Was it the Spectator?
It was. I mean, I can't criticise the Spectator.
Well, okay,
but
maybe friends.
It was others as well.
Yes, lots of people stealing her work, which was unfair because she
did it.
She did the groundwork, and she's utterly brilliant and hilarious. I honestly, when I was here, I just thought she was brilliant. But there's so many people coming forward now. Thankfully, one of the good sides of social media and the internet is it allows people who can spot a problem, can come out and be famous and make money from it, doing good things. And I think we've got this growing but weakening old school system of politics and corruption. But I feel like there's enough people now that want this to die.
Yeah, well, it's because
it's
because we love our country.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing that we talk about, because there was a completely facile debate about who is and who isn't English, which again, I just found very irritating because it was legally dishonest. Because actually what's going on is that there are three different definitions.
Was this the Rishi Sunak?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't care. I was like, this is a pointless debate.
But it was completely facile because they wouldn't engage with a proper definition. Like, what definition are you using when you say he's? Because there's I call it politically English, culturally English, and ethnically English. And, you just need to recognize that all those three exist. It's possible to be all three. It's possible to just be one and still be English. Let's be absolutely honest about this. But the problem is that they don't engage with that. They just engage at the sort of facile level. And we need to get back to admitting that we love our country, all of us, whether we're politically English, culturally English, or ethnically English, or any combination thereof. We all love our country. We all love Britain. We all love the United Kingdom. A real shout out here to Northern Ireland, who have been utterly, I'm really upset about Northern Ireland. And I was one of the few voices to criticise the Windsor Framework, which is, I'm technically a member of the Tory party, so I had to betray, in some people's eyes, my own party by pointing out what the Windsor Framework did. I don't think it's a betrayal to say what your policy does. I'm not going to. I don't see why I should be under some obligation to lie. And then I was attacked on Twitter. So a member of the House of Lords, quite a senior person, I won't go any further than that, tweeted to say that my editor shouldn't have published me. And then some other lawyers tweeted that I was wrong, which is that's proven false. I'm absolutely right. I was just first. But we have thrown Northern Ireland under the bus. And if we're one country, and point that people don't say, because I'm very English, people sort of assume that I just love England. But actually, I'm quite a softie, and I don't think I'd be very good in a war. And I think that's probably characteristic of quite a lot of the English. We didn't really get an empire until we had Scotland in particular. And the Scots and the Northern Ireland, both of them, but per head of population, provide massively disproportionate amounts of the armed forces. I mean, basically, English people are soft little hobbits like me who want to stay home and drink beer, whereas they're the brave, gallant warriors who go sailing across the seas. So we do all get things from each other. Although it's true that we run, the three of them largely off money generated in England. That's largely because the money is generated in London, which we all come to. And the Welsh come here and the Scots come here, and so you can't really say it's English wealth. It's all of our wealth, and so I want us to go back to being a country that openly loves itself and is proud of itself.
What was wrong with the Windsor Framework?
The Windsor Framework leaves the Northern Ireland under the ECJ. It leaves it effectively, therefore, inside the EU. It means that new EU laws will apply there and do apply there. There's something called the Stormont break, which is a complete joke. It doesn't work on any level and it's never going to be pulled, which in theory could protect them from one of the laws, but it's just nonsense. They are effectively, a protectorate state of the EU, but they have no voice in the EU. So they have no... I think the EU is largely now mock democracy, but they don't even engage in that. They don't have a commissioner. They don't have votes in the parliament, and they are just controlled by the EU. It's one of the reasons, the knock-on effect for all of us is that I get deeply amused when governments do performative things. And I'm not terribly fond of the current Labour government, so let's just laugh at the previous Tory government just to balance things out. They were proposing to ban animal trophies. Now that's a deeply moral issue, and I'm not saying animals should be hunted for trophies or sports. I'm literally just not going anywhere near that. I just probably think they shouldn't. I'm quite a softie when it comes to animals, as most of us are. But you can't, okay? Because the EU is not proposing to ban animal trophies. So animal trophies would stay legal in Northern Ireland. And then there's something called the UK Internal Markets Act, which means that goods from Northern Ireland have to flow over here without us stopping them. And there are very limited circumstances in which we can stop them, but they're mostly, it's causing a plague. But unless these trophies could be said to be causing a plague, you have to let them come over here. Right. So you've performatively banned something, and yet it's still coming in. And
they know this.
It was raised by, there's a very brilliant, I'm going to forget his name now, but there's a very clever DUP MP who raised this, Sammy Wilson, who raised this with the minister. And the minister immediately, she just got completely flustered. And just said, "Oh, I'll have to ask my officials. And they never officially came back on it. There was a general election before they did, but they had months. They could have come back on it. But it's perfectly clear that he's right. And it's for anything that they'd want to ban here. So if you wanted to ban foie gras here, and it's not just that, there are some really bad things that the EU is doing that it gets no coverage because our press is so ridiculously pro-EU, because it never got over 2016, because how dare the plebs not do as they were supposed to. But as far as I can tell. And I think my superpower is that I don't care about Brexit. So I literally was holding the baby at the time.
Oh, I changed my mind the day before. I was back and forth and back and forth.
That's good, and that's how people should be. That's how voters should be, sophisticated and not dogmatic. But the EU now is a very different beast from the EU that was. And one of the oddest things that I think this country, for a start, I don't think we would have let them do it if we were still in it. But you'll remember BSE?
Yes.
And so after BSE, we all went never again. Because, it should never have happened, and let's never have this again. Listeners and viewers, you may not remember, BSE, but BSE was caused by feeding animals to vegetarian cows and who are supposed to eat grass. And then as a result of the spinal cords from the animals they were fed, they developed you got BSE, and then ultimately that passed down the human food chain and could cause illness in in us. So many of us stopped eating beef for fear of our lives. It was quite a scary thing, BSE.
And it didn't help calling it mad cow's disease.
No, and it was exactly.
And we saw those awful videos of cows unable to walk.
Yeah.
It was awful.
It was very hideous. And so we brought in a bunch of rules, EU-wide rules, to stop that practice. And the EU has repealed those rules.
Why?
I don't know. I think it's absolutely bonkers. But there's no way we would have repealed those rules.
No.
It's just no way. I don't believe. And so we have to know that can come in via Northern Ireland. And there's all sorts of things that can come in via Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is the Windsor Framework is a very unsafe system. If we leave the ECHR and the ECJ, we get rid of any last vestige of the ECJ here, and we do what I talked about with the UN to control migration, they can still come in via Northern Ireland.
Oh.
And the ECJ will rule that they have a fundamental right to that. And I mean, Northern Ireland, we can probably pull, the EU will say that we can't pull Northern Ireland out of the ECHR. The EU will try and say that we can't pull out of the ECHR. I'm waiting for this inevitable fight. But there is a way that I can get us out of the ECHR without the EU being able to block us.
You're putting yourself up there now. There's a way I can do it. They're going to bring you in.
Well, I'm not going to go any further because the last time I did, somebody drafted. So I pointed out that the Good Friday Agreement didn't really matter because it's not incorporated into the law. It's just it's a diplomatic statement that we all treat with the honour of a diplomatic agreement, but it's not actually law, and it was never incorporated. So when it was made in the 90s, it wasn't made law. Somebody and I said, as a result, we can ignore it. It doesn't matter. If we want to leave the ECHR, we can. Don't need to pay any attention to the Good Friday Agreement because that's true. That was a true legal statement. During the process of the Windsor Framework, which, by the way, is a series of little laws rather than one big law, which I think is, again, sneaky. I think that's sneaky stabby, designed to stop someone repealing it. They incorporated the Good Friday Agreement for the first time ever.
Okay.
And then this went before a judge, and the poor judge is just sat there going, why are they? I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, the language in the Good Friday Agreement was never intended for this. So, it doesn't work. Again, it's a bit like Ofcom. It's all drafted flowery language to keep both sides happy. That's what you do in a diplomatic compromise. You don't then pretend that that's capable of becoming law, but they have. But we can just unincorporate that. That's I see that as a nasty little trick, but I spotted it, so it'll go. So what I won't do is tell you how you leave the ECHR without the EU being able to kick off.
I think we need you in Whitehall somehow.
What's very clear to me is that there are people who are trying to embed their view of the world, and if they're lawyers, I'll be deeply embarrassed because, again, I think that is an abuse of our power. People when I trusted to be a lawyer, I'm trusted to put Stephen's personal views aside, and again, if I were in government, I wouldn't be saying we should leave the ECHR. I would simply say, Minister, if you want me to draft it so that you can leave the ECHR, I'll draft it. And if you don't, and actually, to his credit, the guy who wrote the Human Rights Act for the Blair government, so hardly a right winger, but he's a lovely man, really lovely man, and a friend. And he said, I told Tony at the time, it can be repealed. It can be repealed. So they will do this massive big, it can't possibly be repealed. It can't. And it's like,
it can.
So that's the level to which I would be willing to assist. But yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked at my notes once. This is utterly brilliant. Is there anything I've not covered you wish we had?
I wish that people would feel empowered to engage in the political process. I wish that they would feel able to learn from their constitution. That's why I do my podcast on the constitution as a free thing. So it's not, I don't even paywall it because it just felt deeply immoral. The original plan was to do a few free and then stick it behind a paywall, but it's their constitution and no one else is teaching them it. And I think it should be taught in schools, and I think there probably should be a campaign to get it taught in schools. We'd have to teach the right one, because what's hilarious is that you see the cultural impact of the United States. Genuinely, people who think they know about our constitution will tell people that we have the separation of powers, which is that American system.
We don't.
No, and it's beyond bad to say that we have the separation of powers when we don't. What was going on inside the EU was that they were trying to change the constitutions of all the member states to sort of be the same. This is not necessarily sinister, by the way. That one size fits all is arguably sensible. Although I think the EU should copy America and look at them and say that actually that's a successful federal system. We should be a federal system, but they're not. They'll go down their own way, and I not for them to listen to me. And they probably don't like me because I do say things that aren't always convenient for them. But once we're out, no, and that's the real snapback. It's people didn't adapt quickly enough to the fact that we'd left it. And lawyers like me were still dewy-eyed. A lot of them got very emotional about it, so they wanted to be in the EU. So they were pretending to a large extent. But the minute we left, we snapped back to our old constitution, and we don't have separation of powers. We have all the powers in one place. That's the principle. I mean, they've sort of put the Supreme Court somewhere else, but they can move it back any second. The Welsh Parliament and the Scottish Parliaments are not parliaments. Okay,
I didn't know that.
They're just called parliaments.
Okay.
They're not parliaments. We could give Buckinghamshire a parliament tomorrow. We could rename Buck Unitary Authority Buckinghamshire Parliament. It wouldn't be a parliament either. And the Welsh Parliament, the best example of this is, so the Welsh Parliament was called the Welsh Parliament. And now the Welsh Parliament is called the Senedd. Who changed its name? Westminster. They couldn't change their own name. Westminster has to do it. So Westminster, I call it in when I talk about this, because I'm a massive Tolkien fan, but I call it the fires of Mount Doom.
Okay.
Westminster can make and destroy anything, any law in the world, and if it wanted to, it could abolish the Scottish Parliament tomorrow. The Scottish Parliament has no greater right to exist than the rights Westminster gave it. The Supreme Court has no greater right to exist than the rights Westminster gave it. We get into difficult constitutional territory if Westminster starts saying things like, I will therefore abolish all judges. It gets constitutionally murky, but I'm on the side that would probably say they could do that, but they shouldn't do that. And that what we do in this country is we defend things through politics, not law. Because law is an imperfect system. What they needed to realize is that if Hitler can have a legal system, then the law is not inherently good and the law will not protect you. And the best example of this I like to raise is the Russian constitution. So the Russian constitution, firstly, they're ECHR members, or they were. And secondly, the constitution is a new one. It's very well written. And it prevents anybody becoming a dictator. So there'll never be a dictator in Russia. Because no, it's not possible. You see, the Constitution will protect them. Yeah. You see, and it's like, and I think this is why I irritate my fellow lawyers, because they want to see themselves as like. And there was a series of books written by an American philosopher of law in the 90s. Literally, he wrote, "Judges are Hercules, judges are superheroes, judges are Superman." Literally, that's what they believe, and they are inculcated in that belief. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're really not. They're little old men and little old ladies. And they're not going to stop you if the dictator comes knocking. What will stop a dictator is if we are a unified political structure. And you have to remember that this constitution survived that. You know, we really have to go back to, almost all of us should just stop, sit down and go, what was 1930s Britain actually like? Why was it uniquely able to survive tyranny? Because it wasn't, everybody knows about Hitler, but, you know, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, that guy down in Spain. But, you know, and there was one in Portugal, you know, and everybody fell to it. I mean, the French didn't initially, they fell militarily. So you can't really criticize that French constitution, although I'm not sure, I never want to talk about French law. But we uniquely survived the last time, and I want people to, because at the moment, it's still seen as outlandish to talk about the risk of a dictator. It's still seen in polite society, amongst elite society, I'd be accused of alarmism or being overly dramatic. Can we just remember that a dictator is the default state? It's the default position for the humans. We are an evolved social ape, and we default to having one, almost always man, in charge. That is what most human beings who have ever lived have always lived under, that structure. Our beautiful, marvelous constitutional democracy is rare. And so we're going to need to protect it. It's not odd to think that we might have to protect it. It's not outlandish, it's not. People, I think, can see things now. So I'm more willing to speak than I was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, if I'd said this, I would have been absolutely pilloried. I have the worst thing in the world, which is that in politics, you never want to be right first. Okay, it's always a bad thing because humans, they don't like it. It doesn't go well. You have to build a consensus before you can come out and say what you actually think. One of my great delights in life is when people start reciting my own argument back to me. So I'll talk to people privately, and then when my argument keeps coming back to me, I'm like, oh, good, yes, it's landed. Right, we can talk about it publicly now. So I was aware of all of this. But I think it is now time to say, if we don't protect our democracy, if we don't engage with it, if we don't know who our local councillors are, if we don't volunteer, then we're going to lose everything. And we're a great volunteer state. I was very proud to see a friend was putting himself forward to be a magistrate. And let's get back to that. And that's only ever going to work if we undo the Blair trick of let's stop sneering at volunteers. Sometime in the Blair era, we started sneering at people like magistrates. It's like, no, they're volunteering in their community. They're dispensing justice. They're doing it, I believe, honestly and with nobility. I'm going to respect them. So I walk around my market town. You can walk around Bedford. There will be a load of plaques and a load of stones. And you will always see JP. And it's, that level of volunteering used to be like, I know of people who were peers of the realm who would sit as a justice of the peace. They would sit as a magistrate because that is our civic duty. We need to rediscover our civic duty and not so much our human rights. We need to bang on less and less about what we deserve and what we can get and, start thinking what we can do for our society. Otherwise, we won't have a nice country and we'll get one of those awful dictators.
Stephen, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone listening, go and check out Stephen's Substack. I'll try and share it out. I haven't watched enough of the constitutional videos as I'd like. To be honest, I was enjoying the entertainment learning about your dogs. But it is brilliant, and you make everything accessible. But I think the principles are in the right place, and we're at this moment in time where there is a huge demand for change. And so hope to see it. No, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Absolute pleasure.
And thank you for everyone for listening. See you soon.